Recently, in the South Korean city of Gyeongju, a meeting took place that has already entered the history of the global economy. Donald Trump, having returned to the White House, once again demonstrated his ability to pressure allies into reaching the most favorable agreements for the United States. After his personal meeting with the South Korean leader, both sides announced a new trade and investment deal. According to the agreement, South Korea will receive a partial reduction of American tariffs in exchange for committing to invest around $350 billion into the U.S. economy. For comparison, that amount is roughly equivalent to the annual GDP of a medium-sized country. On paper, everything looks logical. America gets investments. Korea gains access to the U.S. market. But behind this apparent success lies a hidden cost. For Trump, it is a perfect demonstration of his America First strategy. For South Korea, it is a forced concession under heavy pressure from tariffs and threats that, according to Korean sources, had been discussed long before in closed meetings with representatives of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Even before this meeting, the largest Korean corporations, Samsung, Hyundai, SK Group, LG Energy Solution, were already actively investing in American industry. They were building battery factories, opening semiconductor clusters in Texas and Arizona, and investing billions in energy technologies and green infrastructure. These investments had been strategic, voluntary, and mutually beneficial, but now, in essence, they have been made under the threat of tariffs. Whereas Seoul could previously speak of an equal partnership with Washington, the relationship now increasingly resembles a one-sided dependency, where Korea is forced to follow the American line to avoid losing access to markets, technologies, and credit. At a press conference in Gyeongju, Trump expressed his satisfaction, declaring that these deals bring the money home and emphasizing the creation of jobs for Americans. For the U.S. domestic audience, it was a signal of strength and the ability to dictate the rules. But in Asia, the move was seen differently. There, observers see how Washington turns the economy into a tool of pressure even on its allies. South Korean society, though not openly protesting, increasingly discusses that the country now stands between two worlds. On one side are commitments to the United States. On the other, the vast Chinese market, which provides billions of dollars in export revenue. Any shift toward Washington triggers an immediate response from Beijing. Additional inspections, trade barriers, reduced purchases of microchips and cars. Therefore, the New Deal with Trump is not merely an economic agreement, but a political trap from which it will be extremely difficult to escape. The American side presents it all as a mutually beneficial partnership. Korean companies will create tens of thousands of jobs in the United States and receive tax incentives. But looking deeper, it becomes clear that the real goal of the deal is not about money, but about control over production chains. Washington aims to ensure that key components, from microchips to batteries, are produced on U.S. soil. Any technological dependence on Asia must disappear. In South Korea itself, this causes growing concern. If the main factories and assembly lines are relocated to America, what remains in the country are only research and logistics. This slowly but surely drains Seoul's industrial potential. Experts call it technological relocation, when the core of industry moves abroad, leaving the nation in the role of a service center. The reaction is particularly tense in the technology sector. South Korea has spent decades building its reputation as a leader in microelectronics, displays, and batteries. Now, a significant portion of that expertise is shifting to the United States under American laws and subsidies. For Trump, this is a success, the return of industry. For Korea, it is the risk of becoming an intermediate link rather than the center of innovation it has been for the past 30 years. Meanwhile, China is closely observing the situation. Beijing understands that the stronger Washington pressures Seoul, the more opportunities open up for China. Already, Chinese companies are offering Korea participation in new energy and logistics projects without political conditions or tariff threats. For Seoul, this is tempting. The market is vast, and demand for electronics and automobiles remains stable. But an open rapprochement with China could provoke a harsh reaction from Trump, who perceives such moves as betrayal. Korean insiders report that during the summit, representatives of major corporations were already discussing future deals with China, including joint battery production and logistics routes across East Asia. Just a few years ago, such open cooperation with a potential competitor under US pressure would have been unthinkable. Thus, Korea has found itself at a geopolitical crossroads. On one side lies economic integration with China. On the other, military dependence on the United States. Trump effectively forced Seoul to sign a deal on his terms, but the balance of power has become even more fragile. Against this backdrop, domestic discontent is growing. Economists warn that excessive concentration of investment abroad weakens the domestic labor market. Young people, worried about rising prices and unemployment, increasingly ask why South Korean money is creating jobs in Texas and Ohio instead of in Busan or Incheon. Politicians try to ease the tension by speaking of mutual benefits and the strengthening of strategic partnership, but more and more citizens see coercion disguised as cooperation. The situation is worsened by the fact that Trump intends to use this success as a precedent. Japan, Taiwan, and even Canada could come under similar pressure. The formula is simple. America lowers tariffs only for those who invest billions back into its economy. This is the new format of global trade, where everyone must pay for their place in the market. Against the backdrop of the Korean deal, the situation with other Asian allies of the United States is becoming even more alarming. It would seem that India remains a reliable strategic partner for Washington in the region, but recent events show the opposite. After Trump introduced high tariffs on Indian exports in August of this year, New Delhi significantly reduced its purchases of American weapons and military equipment, and also revised the conditions for the participation of American companies in its defense projects. This was already a serious signal. A country that was once considered a key ally in the Indo-Pacific region was showing readiness for independent decisions and the search for alternative partners. This dynamic creates a domino effect. South Korea, under Trump's pressure, is investing billions in the United States. India is expanding its economic ties with China, and Japan and Taiwan are watching events unfold with concern. In Japan and Taiwan, there is an understanding that the strengthening of Chinese influence in the region could shift the balance of power, and countries that have long relied on American strategic support are now facing uncertainty. American analysts are already warning that the United States risks losing influence in Asia, not in the long term, but literally within a few years if this policy of pressure continues. Meanwhile, inside China, there is close monitoring of the Korean and Indian dynamics. Beijing understands that the stronger Washington pressures its allies, the more opportunities arise to expand its economic and technological influence. Chinese companies are already actively discussing joint projects with South Korea and India in energy, logistics, and infrastructure, including new routes for the transport of microelectronics and batteries. Beijing realizes that economic initiatives without political pressure create long-term and resilient ties that are difficult to break. Of course, in the short term, South Korea gains economic stability and political calm, but in the long term, it faces the gradual loss of independence, as key decisions are no longer made in Seoul but in Washington. If such things could once be hidden behind diplomatic wording, now it is all too clear. Trump has achieved an agreement with Korea on his own terms, placing the entire country's economy in dependence on his political ambitions.